Hello, I'm Paul Carroll, and welcome to part 3 of this month's digital darkroom video tutorials on increasing contrast in your mono pics. In this final part of the video tutorial, we'll be looking at an alternative method for boosting contrast in your pics, which is often referred to as non-destructive dodging and burning. One of the problems of dodging and burning directly onto an image layer, like we showed you in part 2, is the effect is irreversible. Photoshop's memory will only store around 20 undo changes. So if you're building up the effect gradually, like we recommend, using lots of brush strokes, then sometimes it's not always possible to go back far enough. The way non-destructive dodging and burning works, however, is that you apply the dodge and burn effects to separate overlay layers. So you're not actually affecting the pixels on your image layer. And by painting into a mask, for example my burn mask to darken the sky, and the dodge mask to lighten the midground and the foreground, we can easily paint back into these masks to reverse any of the changes that we've done, should we not be happy with any of our dodging and burning. Okay, I'm going to close down this image and we'll show you how it's done. Open up the image great.jpg from off your CD-ROM. And the first thing we need to do is create 2 new overlay layers. Now to do this you're going to need your layers palette open. You can see mine's open here on the right hand side of the screen, but if your layers palette is not open, all you need to do is just go up to the window menu and down to layers. So to create a new layer, in the layers palette just click on this new layer icon, which is just underneath the blending mode box, and that creates a new layer 1. I'm going to rename this layer and I'm going to call it Dodge. And I need to change the blending mode of the layer. It's currently set to normal, as you can see in our blending mode box, but if I just click on the downward arrow, I get the blending mode menu and I can select overlay from the list. Now I need to fill my new dodge layer with 50% grey pixels, and I can do this by going up to the edit menu and down to fill layer, and then under the contents menu and the use box, at the moment it's set to foreground colour, but if I just click on the downward arrow I can select 50% grey from the list and click OK. And as you can now see, that's filled my new dodge layer with 50% grey pixels. But because we're on the overlay blending mode, that's having no effect on the image underneath. I'll just quickly show you, if we switch that back to normal, we've now got those 50% grey pixels covering our background image. But as we're set to overlay, the image from the layer beneath comes through. And the way the non-destructive dodging and burning technique works is by painting with a brush onto my overlay layer with either black or white, we can darken and lighten the image underneath. Okay, we need to create a second overlay layer, which is going to be our burn layer. So all we need to do now with our dodge layer created is simply drag the dodge layer over our create new layer icon. There we go, we've got a second overlay layer. I'm just going to rename that. I'm going to call it burn, because we're going to be applying our darkening to our burn layer and our lightening to the dodge layer. Now I'm going to start by darkening the sky. So I need to paint black pixels onto my burn layer. So make sure your burn layer is selected and hit D on your keyboard to set your foreground colour to black. Then over in your toolbox, select the paintbrush tool, and up in the options bar we can configure our brush. So first I'll enter the brush's palette, and I want to select a nice large soft edge brush, so I'll go for around a 300 pixel brush. I can leave the mode set to normal, but I want to control the opacity, because we can use the opacity slider to control how dark the pixels underneath our burn layer will become when we run the brush over them. So for example, by setting the opacity to 100% will really darken the pixels, or setting it to a lower value will still darken them but by a lesser amount. Now in the sky, I'm going to apply 2 different opacities. At first I'm going to burn the sky in by an opacity of around 40%, just to darken it overall. I think I need a slightly larger brush to do this, so I'll just hit the right hand square bracket key up to about a 700 pixel brush. Now I just click with my left mouse button. Remember, I'm on my burn layer, and I'll just run the burn tool over the sky. And you can see there we're just darkening down some of the grey tones in the sky. I'm working around the tree here and down over these really bright highlight areas. I'm just going to select a slightly smaller brush just to work a little bit more delicately there, and you can just see that's really now bringing a little bit more detail into those highlights. Okay, I'm quite happy with that, but I really want to add some more drama into these darker sections of the sky. So I'm going to crank the opacity up to, say, around 80%. I'll largen my brush again back to around a 700 pixel, and I'm just going to work on these sections here that are a little bit darker and just really bring some contrast into these areas. Okay, next I'm going to turn my attention to the midground and the foreground. So we're going to really lighten those areas. So we need to click on our dodge layer. And this time, instead of painting black onto our overlay layer to darken it, we're going to paint white to lighten it. So press X on your keyboard to set your foreground colour to white. Again, we can control the strength of the lightning using the opacity slider. And I'm going to be applying around a 25% opacity to this midground area. But I'm going to really increase the opacity to around 60% to really boost the contrast in this foreground interest at the bottom of the frame. So let's start with the midground area. I click on the downward arrow and just drop the opacity to 25%. I've got quite a large soft edge brush, so I'm quite happy with that. I'm just going to run this brush over the bracken in the midground here, and you can really see how that's lightening the midground tones. Okay, quite happy with that. So now back to the opacity slider. I'm just going to crank up the opacity to around 60%. And now I'm going to run my brush over the foreground. And you can see that's just really boosting the contrast in the stones and the grate and the rocks in the foreground. Okay, so we've lightened the midground and the foreground quite nicely, but I still want to increase the contrast a little bit in these areas. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click back onto my burn layer, change my foreground colour back to black, and I'm going to lower the opacity to, say, around 20%. And now I can just run my brush over these foreground areas, and that's just really going to increase the darkness of the black. So I'm just going to run it over these sort of shadow areas in the bracken as well. And there we are, that's really boosted the contrast. I'll just quickly demonstrate how the effect is reversible, however. If I wasn't happy with that darkening that I'd just done on my burn layer in the foreground, all I'd need to do, with the same opacity value of 18%, switch my brush back to white in the foreground, and now I can paint back into this foreground area, still on my burn layer, but now I'm painting white, and I'm just really lightening those areas that I darkened down before. I'll just change it back again though. I'll just quickly change back to black and just darken that down. Okay, there we go. We've used two overlay layers to darken the sky and boost the contrast in the foreground and midground of our picture, and we've used a second dodge overlay layer, which has allowed us to really lighten the tones in the midground and the foreground as well. But all of these changes have been non-destructive, as we've been applying them onto separate layers, and we've left our initial background pixels completely untouched. I hope you've really enjoyed this technique on non-destructive dodging and burn. Give it a go using the start image off the CD-ROM, and then get dodging and burning your own pics in future. Alright, cheers.